What's up guys, my name is Ace, and Season 4 for Black Ops 6 is now here, and in today's video, we're going to be going into great detail with the weapon balancing changes that took place with this update, including before and after images whenever possible. But before we dive in, I've got some pretty big news, and that is I am partnering with True Game Data and essentially taking over the multiplayer side of the site. I'm going to be the one handling all of the data on the multiplayer side. Now, I'm still in the process of getting up to speed with things and also updating the site since it has been a very long time since the multiplayer side has been touched. So bear with me as I get everything worked out, but going forward, True Game Data is not just going to be accurate and great for Warzone, it's going to have up-to-date accurate stats for multiplayer as well. Now, back to the topic of today's video, let's get into the weapon balancing, and these patch notes are largely dominated by some changes to two particular attachments on a bunch of the guns in the game. In fact, it's actually most of the guns in the game. So let's get those out of the way first. The first attachment here that saw a bunch of changes was the Marksman grip in the underbarrel category, and with this, it saw a 5 to 10% buff to your gun kick and or view kick when focused or holding your breath with this grip. And it applies to all of these guns on this list here. So most of the assault rifles and SMGs and marksman rifles saw buffs to the Marksman grip in particular. Then when it comes to the heavy stock and the combat stock, both of these saw a 5 to 10% buff to their flinch resistance values on all of the guns you can see on the screen here. Keep in mind, these changes to these attachments are mainly just to bring parity to the weapon classes. So at the end of the day, this probably isn't going to have a massive impact on the gameplay experience at all, or even any of the weapon builds that I'm going to be using. Perhaps I will revisit that Marksman grip, but at the end of the day, for the pacing of multiplayer, it just doesn't seem to make sense to me to use that grip. But as I said, this is what largely took up space in the patch notes here. So now that we have that out of the way, we can get into the much more focused changes. And let's start this off with the XM4. This saw a slight buff to its recoil when using the CHF barrel. It reduced our penalties, both vertical and horizontal, by 5% when using the CHF barrel. So not really a crazy change by any means on the XM4. However, with the AK-74, we saw the same sort of changes where they reduced the recoil penalties with the CHF barrel, but this time it's to a more significant degree. It was a 15% improvement to our vertical recoil penalty and a 10% improvement to our horizontal recoil penalty. And you can see the results of that in the recoil plots here. This is a much more noticeable difference. In addition to that, with the AK-74, there was a slight range boost as well. Our 4-shot kill range went from 38.1 meters up to 40.6 meters, so it's now in line with our maximum damage range on the XM4. Then let's move on to the GPR-91, and this one just had its mid damage range, or its second damage range, removed entirely and replaced with its maximum damage range. While our 5-shot kill potential to the body is totally unchanged with this update, it's still the exact same 45.7 meters. What this change does is it makes headshots a lot more effective between 22.2 meters and 45.7 meters, since we now only need 2 headshots mixed in with body shots to get a 4-shot kill without the CHF barrel, or 1 with the CHF barrel, and previously that only applied from 0 to 22.2 meters. So not a massive adjustment to the GPR, but it is going to be a bit more effective with headshots. And speaking of headshots and the CHF barrel, this one also saw some improvements to its recoil when using the CHF barrel. However, just like with the XM4, this was only a 5% improvement to horizontal and vertical recoil control, and as a result, it's hardly even noticeable when looking at the recoil plots. Now, the final one of the CHF barrel recoil penalty improvements was with the Model L, and this one saw a 10% improvement to its vertical recoil penalty and a 5% improvement to its horizontal recoil control penalty. And looking at it pre-patch versus post-patch, it is a little bit better post-patch for sure. If anything, it actually looks like there was more than a 5% improvement to horizontal recoil control, but this should just make the CHF barrel slightly more viable on this gun. Next up, still in the assault rifle category, the AS-Val saw a very slight damage change to its mid damage range, so that second damage range, that 6-shot kill range. This just went from 18 damage up to 19 damage, which means it's still going to be a 6-shot kill to the body. Nothing changes there. However, what this single point of damage adjustment does is it makes headshots more forgiving. Now, instead of 3 headshots mixed in with body shots for a 5-shot kill, you only need 2 without the CHF barrel and 1 with the CHF barrel. So just like with the GPR adjustments, this isn't going to have a massive impact on the effectiveness of this gun, but it is a slight boost that will help you in some specific situations. Now, a much more noticeable adjustment here was to the Kilo 141. This one saw a nerf to its base recoil, specifically the view kick strength, so the magnitude of the movement of your point of aim or the center of your screen while firing. As you can see, this one was a very noticeable adjustment here. There is a lot more magnitude both vertically and horizontally when it comes to this view kick, and therefore it's going to require a lot more effort to keep this recoil under control. Now, at the end of the day, I still consider this to be a very accurate gun. It still climbs quite slowly. The gaps between those bullet holes are still pretty minimal. So it's not like the end of the world for the Kilo 141, but it's not nearly as accurate as it once was. And you'll definitely have to be working harder to keep that recoil under control. And then finally, for the assault rifle category, we saw a very similar change to the CR-56 AMAX. This one also just saw increased view kick overall. And this one was an even bigger adjustment compared to the Kilo 141. You can see this gun now climbs quite a bit. It went from having one of the better recoil patterns in the assault rifle category to now having one of the highest magnitudes of recoil out of the assault rifles. And this is going to be especially painful for those first few shots that you fire. Those gaps between those shots have increased quite noticeably here. And as a result, after this update, the AMAX is going to be significantly less accurate than it once was, and it's now going to be quite a bit more limited at range, even if you're using recoil improving attachments. And with that finally wraps it up for the assault rifle category. Now let's jump into the LMGs, which all saw some buffs. And we'll start this off with the PU-21, which saw some nice recoil buffs. As we can see here, there is noticeably less horizontal and vertical recoil. So this will be quite a bit more accurate post-patch compared to pre-patch. Additionally, we saw some mobility improvements here. They buffed the base movement speed, the sprint speed, and our aim down sight firing movement speed by just a little bit. Our aim walking speed, while they stated that it was improved in the patch notes, they didn't state any values, and looking at it pre-patch versus post-patch, we have the exact same value stated, so it doesn't appear there was any meaningful adjustment to that at least. Next, with the XMG, they did state that there was a recoil improvement, but looking at it pre-patch versus post-patch, honestly, I'm not really seeing it too much here. So compared to the PU-21, this wasn't as big of a recoil improvement, but that's okay. This gun's really accurate as is. And then on top of that, we did see buffs across the board to our movement speed values. So overall, the XMG will be just slightly better than it was pre-patch, but this isn't like a game changer for this gun by any means. As for the GPM G7, we see a similar trend. Our recoil values were improved, and it is noticeable in this case. You can see a lot less vertical magnitude. However, it did kind of squish the recoil plot down, and there's still a decent amount of horizontal recoil. So definitely still something to be aware of with this gun if you're spraying for a little while at least. And then when it comes to our mobility improvements, we see a similar story. Across the board, outside of our aim walking speed, we saw some small improvements. And then finally for the LMGs, the Fang 82 saw a very nice recoil improvement here. This gun had a crazy high magnitude of recoil, even though it climbed very slowly to that magnitude. Now that's been cut down quite considerably. And then while they stated there were mobility improvements across the board, the only notable improvement here was to our aim down sight firing movement speed, and this was just a slight improvement. So there we go, yet another buff to LMGs. We have been seeing buffs almost with every weapon balancing update to this category, and they just keep getting a little bit better with every update. Now for our final weapon changes, let's get into the burst marksman rifles. Both of these saw some improvements. With the SWAT 556, they reduced our standard burst delay from 220 milliseconds down to 190 milliseconds. That's quite a big improvement. And then with rapid fire, it went from 170 milliseconds down to 160 milliseconds. And what this means is our time to kill when getting a one burst kill hasn't changed at all, since there's no burst delay to be worrying about, and that's the only thing that's changed. However, if we do require that fourth bullet to kill, this is where we see some nice improvements to that time to kill value. At the end of the day, this is largely a feel thing as well. Just having the ability to get that next burst out noticeably faster does make quite a big difference, especially when you account for the movement in this game. Now on top of this, the patch notes also stated they adjusted the recoil pattern within the burst. And without rapid fire, if anything, this looks like a nice improvement to our recoil. However, with rapid fire, there's a lot more of that first shot jump. And as a result, make sure you're using either the muzzle brake or the ported compensator on the SWAT 556 to get that first shot recoil as under control as you possibly can. Now, when it comes to the other burst marksman rifle, the AEK-973, we saw similar changes. Our standard burst delay was reduced quite noticeably from 325 milliseconds down to 290 milliseconds, which is worth noting, that's better than our pre-patch rapid fire burst delay. So really nice improvement there. And then with rapid fire, this was also improved quite noticeably down to 260 milliseconds. So once again, this doesn't affect our one burst time to kill at all, but if we require that second burst, we can now get that second burst out noticeably faster with this gun, which is excellent. And now let's have a look at our recoil, which unlike with the SWAT, they didn't state there were any adjustments to the base recoil on this. However, based on my testing, it does look like there's actually a slight improvement here post-patch, at least with the base recoil. They did state in the patch notes that when using rapid fire, they actually increase the penalty to your recoil. So we should be seeing worse recoil with rapid fire on this now. But again, looking at my testing with the recoil plots here, I'm not really seeing much of a difference post-patch compared to pre-patch. So perhaps the patch notes just missed a slight buff to our base recoil with this, like we saw with the SWAT, and that's just counteracting the nerf to the recoil when using rapid fire. So it essentially just cancels it out when using rapid fire. In either case, that's pretty much it, although I just remembered the TR2 saw a very slight adjustment here as well, and with this, they just buffed the drop time. So the amount of time it takes to put the gun away when you're swapping weapons or calling in a streak or just needing to put your gun away for some reason. Previously, it took half a second to do that. Now it just takes 350 milliseconds and is now in line with all of the other Marksman rifles. And there we go. Now that's finally going to wrap it up for all of the weapon balancing that took place with the Season 4 update. Overall, a lot of really minor changes that you're probably never going to notice. However, some pretty significant nerfs to the Kilo 141 and especially the AMAX. Some nice buffs across the board to LMG, so they should all feel at least a little bit better post-patch compared to pre-patch. And then some really nice buffs as well to the burst Marksman rifles that should be quite noticeable. And with that, this is where I want to hear from you guys in those comments down below. How are you feeling about the weapon balancing that took place with this update? Are you guys generally happy with the changes they made? Are there any changes you were hoping to see that they didn't make in this update? Just let me know down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated. And don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.